So how did you make the decision, Ankit, from
Yeah.
engineering, MBA, and security?
Yeah, so actually, yes, that is quite a journey that I've covered. So, to be very fair, I think what has helped me bring myself back to engineering was to that at right points I've been honest enough. So, in the very first year, I understood that I not only do not like things like finance, I absolutely hate finance. So, when I was going for my internships, I was very truthful to my HR. I told them that I do not, I mean, I am an MBA grad, but all I want is to do something related to technology and analytics and so on, things like that. So the internship HR recruiter that I had, he was perhaps somehow impressed by truthfulness, and then he gave me a project to start off in the ISG domain or in the cybersecurity domain of ICICI team. And so from there it started towards the line of cybersecurity, and thankfully it had worked out well for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Ankit. Hi, Mani. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself? So, Mani, I've had the pleasure of working with Mani during my previous job as well at Synopsys, and now at Razorpay as well. And he and I are co-authors of this work plugin called ATOR, ATOR. It's gotten a lot of attention recently. Now, when we released it 2 years ago, very few people were using it. Now that bug bounty has picked up big time in India and across the world, like a lot of people are using this plugin, and they're asking us to go fix issues where we wrote the code 2 years ago. So it is a little bit of a challenge, but yeah, Mani, quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Ashwath. Yeah, like Ashwath mentioned, currently I'm working with as a senior security engineer at Razorpay. So mostly my work will be on the development side with respect to security. So irrespective of whether it is a tool or DDoS protection or anything from pen testing. So whatever the things which I can do as a developer point of view. So mostly my work involved in those areas. So thanks for giving the intro, Ashwath. Looking forward to talk about more things what we did here.
Cool. Awesome. So we wanted to bring you like three different perspectives, right? While we spoke today. So one was like a developer perspective, that which Mani will provide. The second one is more of a security perspective, which Ankit will provide. And the third one is like a DevOps perspective, right? Because DevOps has a lot of role to play, especially when it comes to CDN and so on. So that's where we brought Sri Harsha in. So Harsha, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? So Harsha, I worked with Harsha for a little over a year, and he's somebody who has like a lot of energy. And anytime, day or night, you call him if it's something related to the WAF, CDN, he's always up for it, right? So Harsha, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Thanks for the introduction, sir. So hello everyone, I am Sri Harsha. I work here as a DevOps engineer at Razorpay. So I have 2 years of work experience here, and I have in these 2 years of experience, I have already dealt with a lot of DDoS attacks that were on our infra that happened. And we successfully mitigated a lot of DDoS attacks here as well. So that was very interesting. Anything tech interests me. So, and I am a direct joinee from a college in Razorpay as well.
Okay, cool. So the plan for today is just to talk about what a CDN is, where do we use CDNs, what are the pros and cons, and if you are a website developer who's planning to use a CDN, this is also something, we'll talk a little bit about that. And Harsha will give you like a good overview of what are some of the metrics you need to look at, and also what the final piece, right? The cost, which is the most important piece, especially in this environment. So these are like some of the areas that we plan to cover today. So let's start with Ankit. So Ankit, do you want to kind of explain what a CDN is? What are some of its typical use cases? And then we'll take it from there. And again, in the meantime, if anybody has questions, please feel free to reach out, and you can put the questions on the chat window. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Ashwath. So first of all, when I go to talk about CDN, I think I better start with an analogy. And I recently was going through a delivery through Zepto and things like that, 10-minute delivery in Blinkit. And I was intrigued about what exactly is that they do, so that we get our things delivered in 10 minutes. So to talk in terms of very broad strokes, the basic thing that they do here is the main or the origin source of their uh, product is at one place. And what they've done is created a network of warehouses near the location of their customers, and they've put the products that are needed, or through their own analytics they found out which are the products that are more in demand in those regions, and they have put those products in those warehouses. And whenever there's a demand from one particular location, rather than going to that origin or the original warehouse, they fetch that product from the local warehouse. So this is, in essence, very much similar to what a CDN does here. So if I now talk about CDN infrastructure, let's say there is a user who wants to access some content on a website. So there are essentially what it means is that the user makes request to the backend server, and the server has to display the page. Now, if there are a lot of requests coming in and the requests are similar in nature, perhaps because one of the use cases is that the content being served is of static, or the content is static in nature, or it may happen that the content that we are trying to service for a streaming service, much like that we do whenever we go through some famous YouTube videos or Hotstar streaming the likes. So rather than reaching out to that origin server each time, what a CDN network does is it caches the most searched or most fetched request at one place, which is the cache servers, and then it delivers content to the users through that cached server. So what it does is it not only reduces the load time of the page that it would have taken for the original web server to display, it also dramatically reduces the cost aspect, as well as it increases the overall the performance of the website. So this is one of the most ideal use cases of CDN, as to where the website is static in nature, that the content is mostly static, and it has to be broadcasted to a lot of users, and mostly all the users want to see the same thing. So the prime two I would say use cases for having a CDN network is whenever you are thinking of some things like news websites, or you're thinking of streaming services, there inevitably you will find that the content of those particular websites are being served through a CDN. So I think we can have a live demo as well. I'd ask Mani to help and demonstrate how we can see that whether we are right now, even if we go to check on any of the news channels or go to check on the streaming services, we will find that it is already being served to us by a CDN network.
So Ankit, just summarizing, right? Just so that I understand correctly. So one is what you're saying is use a CDN whenever you have static content. For example, it could be something like a news website or something like a streaming platform, right? So do you think something like an IPL would also be streamed using a CDN?
Yes. So since, as I mentioned, since if we know that what is the content that is getting to be served, we can cache the content according to the geography, and then we can serve to that geography from that server, the cache server. So rather than the user hitting the main origin server at all point of time, it can be served through that cache server.
Okay. No, I think you drew a very good analogy as well, or a very good parallel between CDN and something like a Blinkit, where the companies would know that people near schools would like chocolates and pastries, and they also know what people order at what time of the day. So they could also like stock up ahead of time. And if we draw the same analogy, Asian Paints, one of the biggest reasons why they're the market leader today in India is because they know which shop is going to order what kind of paint, what color of paint, and all of those things. And that's the reason why, they, without the shopkeeper knowing, they know which paint to send. So they immediately send it the previous night. That's the reason why, Asian Paints is the leader. Very, very good analogy, Ankit. So let's maybe do an example. You said, you'll show us like an example, right? So Ankit, back to you.
Sure. So, Mani, can we share the screen and then walk us through?
Yeah, sure.
So meanwhile, Mani post. Sure, Mani.
Yeah. So like Ashwath asked the question, right? The live streaming is possible, or how we are doing it in the CDN. So is it possible, like if you have that cache, if you free the cache memory in the CDN provider, so you can have that live streaming. So that's how currently companies are doing it. And the demo which I'm showing, it's like the news website and then Hotstar, the streaming platform. So let's see how the CDN is worked here to understand it in better way. So everyone is able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah.
So this is a news website. So if you so if you see in the bottom side, left of downside, so you see here, these many datas are being transferred from, if it is not in a CDN, say for example, this is the data which we need as a user. So when you hit ntv.com, so these many MBs of data is getting transferred and coming to your laptop or mobile or whatever it is. So if the CDN is not there, then what happens? Actually, all the traffic will go into the server. So basically CDN is packed by the origin. Origin can be a web server, or it can be the S3 bucket or whatever it is, static content. So in this case, what we are really doing, it's like we are enriching the user experience by reducing the latency. So he don't want to go to the server and get the data anywhere. If it is not in the CDN, it should come from the server, right? So basically, if you see here in the CDN, the request which is going there, you can see the cache hit basically. So it's coming from the cache. So see here, it's coming basically two technology we people talk in CDN. It's like either it's cache hit or cache miss. Basically, whatever the content you are going to share by the origin or server, it has to be cached at the edge locations, and people who are requesting the data, it has to be come from the cache location. So that is a cache hit. If the data is not there in the cache edge location, then it will go to the origin server and put it into the cache. So that time it is a cache miss. So the first time user will generally get missed, and then everything will get stored, and whatever we configured as a TTL, time to live. So till the time the data will be cached at the edge location. So whoever requesting the data, in this case nttv.com, so the data is served from the edge location. It is not at all going back to the server. So most of the news websites, whatever you see here, they either use any of the CDN provider, but mostly they'll use CDN in order to, because the content is very static. They don't want to do the web server and database connect. It's nothing, it's very simple, right? It's like seeing the data, whoever, either you sitting here or you sitting in Delhi or you sitting in US or whatever it is, the data is very same. So in that case, this is the use case for a static thing. Whatever you feel as a static, put it into the storage somewhere. If it is the AWS, people will call it S3 bucket. So put the data and then you configure with the CDN. So the people requesting the data is coming from the CDN. It is not going back to your server. So this is the example of entity.
So good. So Mani, I think you brought up two interesting points, right? So one is the whole concept of the cache, which is a temporary storage, which will store the information for a particular amount of time. So that's what you said, right? By when you said time to live. So every time, instead of going back to the backend server, it will store it here. And if it finds it in the cache, it will send it back directly to the client. And if it doesn't find it in the cache, it will go pull it, then it will temporarily store it and also send it back to the client. Is that
right? Right, exactly.
So one more question here, Mani. Does it, let's say, does it make a difference if I'm situated in Bangalore versus Chennai versus Delhi? Will the CDN help there?
Yeah, it's really, so that's the power of the CDN provider. As a user, we are not worrying about it, but internally how those things are working is like CDN provider have the edge location. So it's in a if it is in a Bangalore or on the whole in India, if you see AP South will be one region. So in perspective of AWS, so they have the different regions. So all those regions, so they have the edge locations. So people who are connecting from down south, the request will go to AP South, or there are other locations in AWS region. So the request will be uh, uh, decided by the CDN, which is near to that place. So the edge location cache is copied everywhere through the private network of AWS. In the AWS case, I'm talking about the only AWS case. So we as a user or as a developer or as a company, we are not worrying about it because the cloud provider is doing it. What they are doing is like they are copying the content to all the locations through the private network. So whoever connecting from Australia or India inside a different location, it's connecting to the nearest edge location, and the data is remains same. Either it's in a Bangalore or it's in a or in a Delhi or whatever it is. The content is very same because it's copied based on the TTL and everything. So as a user, you don't feel it, but internally, these many things are happening.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is with the power of the CDN, the round trip time for an end user also improves. So instead of a Delhi user coming to, if the server is hosted in Mumbai, instead of coming to Mumbai, they will be rendered directly from Delhi. So that's what you're saying, right, Mani?
Yes, right,
okay.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's helpful to know. Okay, so let's talk about how does it help with DDoS attacks, Mani? I know we were exploring this for some time at Razorpay. How can CDNs help prevent against like DDoS attacks?
Okay, so either static or dynamic, whenever you are hosting the application, then you are vulnerable to the DDoS things. Anyone can make a request or whatever it is. So with respect to CDN, so we have the data, and we are not owning the server. The request, it's keep on flooding. The HTTP requests keep on flooding. What obviously the problem which we see as a security team, as a company, it's like the cost which we are going to pay to the cloud provider, it's huge. We are not having any problem with the web server and everything, but the amount of data is getting passed because of the HTTP request or the DDoS attack, whatever happens. So we are going to pay for it. So basically, this CDN is actually maintained by the pricing. In AWS, there are 3 different categories. So we try to reduce the cost as much as possible, right? Irrespective of someone is attacking and we are giving the data, why we need to give the data? We need to worry about the things. At last, we are going to give the money to the cloud provider. So that's the problem which we see.
So Mani, I think my question was slightly different. So let's say you have a web server,
right,
and a WAF versus having a CDN and a web server. Does a CDN plus web server, which is the option 2, does that provide any mitigation against DDoS?
Yeah, we can add the WAF layer in between the CDN. So what happens, the request which is served through CDN, it can go to the static content, you can go to CDN. If it is a dynamic content, you can go to the web server. You don't rely on a web server. And how we are protecting, either it is a static or a dynamic, you can put a WAF in before that. So in that way, CDN or your server will get protected by the WAF thing. So always we suggest you segregate what is static content, and then you decide what are the dynamic content. So those dynamic contents you can put it into the behind the load balancer based on the request, how you want to span up and everything. That's a typical use case. But decide what are the static content, segregate it and put it into the separate like S3 or whatever the storage you want to put it, and make that as a static content, and make CDN to make a call to the static content. So in that way, the request will get served. As a user, they don't worry about what's happening there. But as a tech, we have to think these many things.
Okay. So let me ask you a simple question, right, Mani? Let's say I have a website, and the website is based on, let's say, React.js, right? And there is obviously the JavaScript-based component, which is the build package. Then there are API calls, right? So which would be a good candidate for using a CDN, or would both be used, or could you use CDN for both?
No, obviously the JavaScript thing, whatever you see the build, what you mentioned, so everything can go to the storage, and then you can put the CloudFront in between. So the CloudFront origin for the CloudFront will be S3 bucket in this case, and for the API thing, it's a dynamic based on the user, based on the request. We have to do some kind of a business logic. So those things can't be served by the CDN. At some level, we can do it, but those things can be served by the typical web server.
Okay,
It
so
can be the database connection. Yeah.
What is CloudFront, Mani?
CloudFront is like from the AWS perspective, we have the different services, right? So Akami have their they have their own CDN. So there are different CDNs. Alibaba have their different things. So in our case, what we see, we use as a AWS as an environment cloud provider here. So CloudFront is one of a service. And what that is actually the CDN for by AWS. It's a managed service. That's all. And you mentioned that JavaScript things and the API calls, right? Maybe I can share one more example with razorpay.com, and it's what you asked. It's exactly replica of that. So I can share the screen and then explain. Okay, these are the content from static, and these are the things from the web server.
Understood. So there's there are a couple of questions. So does the CDN protect against DDoS? The second question is, how do CDNs protect against DDoS attacks? And where exactly does the WAF come into play? Do you want to take that question now, Mani, or do you want to answer it later?
Yeah, we can take it. So basically, whenever you create a CDN, it's like you are creating a distribution, and the distribution is shared between different locations. And whenever you create a distribution, you are going to, it's an optional call only. You can create a WAF, web ACL or something like that, and you can attach with the CDN. And web ACL is nothing but the list of WAF rule groups. You can create it and you can attach it to the web ACL. In that way, what the rules are attached to the web ACL, it's a protection for the DDoS attack. So that the minimum thing you can directly go, and there are the managed rule groups which given by AWS. And if you really need some kind of intelligence, then there is a separate intelligence or a separate automation solution you have to create on your own. Whenever the DDoS attack happen, update the WAF rule groups. So in that way, it is more dynamic.
Okay, so I think what you said, Mani, was the first piece, right? So how exactly does a CDN help against DDoS attacks? Just to summarize it, so let's take the NDTV example. If it was just a server, 2.2 MB had to be served whenever one person opened the website. If 100 people opened the website, then it would be 220 MB all at the same time, right? Versus in a CDN, the amount of load that would come on the server would probably be only 2 MB, because all of the rest of the requests would be served directly from the CDN. Is that a correct understanding, Mani?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Good. So I think the short answer is yes, it does help with DDoS attacks, especially when there is static content. Okay. So okay, let's switch gears a little bit, and we'll ask Harsha. So when you configure, thank you, Mani. So when you configure a CDN, right, Harsha? Let's say I'm a developer. I come to you like, hey, Harsha, I want to use a CDN. So what are some of the levers and what are some of the options that a CDN would provide, Harsha?
Okay, good. So to answer this question, I'll be answering specifically from a perspective of the CDN service that we use at Razorpay. So we are mostly on AWS infra, and the CDN service that we use is Amazon CloudFront. So how CloudFront works is, or how CloudFront delivers our content when someone requests these. So CloudFront has multiple data centers in different regions, in different AWS regions. And whenever someone makes a request to your website that you are serving through your CloudFront distribution, so the CloudFront receives a request. This happens. So the request is initially routed to the closest, edge location as specified by Mani and Ankit. So this happens through DNS. So DNS routes your request whenever you request something to the nearest edge location. Then CloudFront, what it does is it first searches whether the requested content is present in the edge location or not. So based on that, it takes a decision, and if the requested content is present in the edge location, it serves it to the end user. Or if the requested content is not present in the edge location, then it makes a request to the origin, that is a web server that sits behind the CloudFront distribution, and retrieves the content that the requester is asking, and then respond to the viewer or the requester with the content he requested for. So this whole process is there, right? So right from where the requester sends a request to the CloudFront distribution, and CloudFront distribution making the decision of whether whether it has to call the origin to retrieve the content or not, and the CloudFront distribution responding to the requester with the content he requested for. This whole behavior of the CloudFront can be customized by 3 different policies. So this is what AWS offers. We can customize the behavior on how this CloudFront behaves, this entire process, using 3 different policies. So let me explain you what these policies are. The first policy is...
Before you go there, I think, so the piece that you're trying to kind of cover is what is the decision tree that CloudFront uses before deciding whether it needs to go to the backend server or just deliver it right from the CloudFront cache itself to the end client, correct?
Correct.
Right. Keep going.
So how does it work? Like I specified, we use 3 different policies to manage the behavior of the CloudFront distribution. The first is the cache policy. So in the cache policy, we tell the CloudFront distribution how long an object has to live in the edge location. We specify the TTL of the object in the edge location. We can also specify what are all the information that the requester has provided in the HTTP request has to be present in the cache key. Now, you might be wondering what is cache keys. So every object that is present in the edge location that is present in the cache has a unique identifier called as a cache key. Now, by default, Amazon CloudFront uses the domain name of the CloudFront distribution and the URL path of the request as the default cache key. So let's say someone from India has requested a site called google.com/something, and so let's say Google is serving these through a CloudFront distribution. So the URL, so let's say they're using an Amazon CloudFront. Using Google does not use Amazon CloudFront, of course. Let's take any general website in any general website. So someone is requesting a page. Let's say they want to access some documentation of that website. So they have requested that particular CloudFront distribution to serve that content. Now, initially, what CloudFront does is, like if you use the default cache behavior of the CloudFront distribution, the default cache keys. So what it does is it takes the URL path and the domain name and sees if there is any cache or not. So if that particular content is already available in the edge location, CloudFront automatically serves. Now, if that is not present, what CloudFront does is it makes a request to the origin, like I mentioned before, and it sends the response to the end user, and it also caches in the edge location as well. So this is how it works. And moreover, AWS also provides us a way to customize our cache keys. What information should be present in the cache key as well. So apart from, let's say if you want to have a specific HTTP header to be present in the cache key. So consider an example. You're someone.
Before we go there, right? I had two questions. So question one is, let's say, we looked at the ndtv.com example. So in the ndtv.com example, let's say, every 30 minutes, the news has to be refreshed, right? So how is that kind of handled?
So you set I specified, right? In the cache policy, you define how long an object has to live in the edge location. So you set the TTL. So
Right.
that you define in the cache policy. And after the object has expired, then the CloudFront will once again make a request to the origin server asking if, trying to look if there is any change in the object that has been requested for. And it kind of gets that information again to the edge location.
Okay, understood. And question two is, let's say, I click on one news article, right? So let's say a new news article has come out. I click on that particular news article. So the first thing it will do is it will go to the backend, fetch the news article and come back here, or go to the S3 bucket, which is the origin that you keep referring to. So once it gets here, it needs to cache this, right? So how do you kind of determine that?
Sorry, determine what?
So determine that, when, let's say I go visit it first, then, you come and visit it. When you come and visit it, it needs to deliver the article from the cache itself, right? So how does it decide, how does it know what is the unique parameter for this particular article?
So that unique identifier is the cache key itself.
Okay. Okay, so in the cache key, you can kind of configure the URL path and a couple of other parameters to basically figure out that this is the unique fingerprint for which you can send it back, right?
Cache key is what determines whether there is cache hit or cache miss. So it kind of derives that information from the HTTP request, and it tells you whether that particular object is present in the edge or not, in the edge location or not.
Understood. So basically, if you have to change, if you were to change the language from, say, let's say English to Hindi, then it would go back to the server and it will use the language parameter. For example, I've seen, add language as as either an HTTP header or query parameter, where it says language equals English or EN or HI, right? So that would also could be added as a parameter.
Correct. So what you said is kind of very interesting. Like let's say a website has different they have different variants of their home page. So in one variant, so let's say they want to serve a person from India, the web page has to be present in Hindi, and they want to present a different variant of a web page. Let's say someone from England are requesting that web page, and they want the language of that page to be present as English US. So they can define a custom cache key. Say they can define a cache policy saying that to include some HTTP header that specifies viewers, like let's say if viewer wants to have English UK variant of the web page. So in our cache policy, we define something called let's say the content language. So we have, let's say there is a HTTP header called content language, and we want to use this particular HTTP header in our cache key. We want this information to be present in our cache key. Then we define that in our cache policy to include this particular HTTP header. Then what happens is in the edge locations, when someone requests a page, that home page with the content language as English UK, a different variant of the page will be stored in the edge location. And when someone from, let's say, Australia requests the same, what is that, URL path with the content language as English AU, then one more variant of that web page will also be stored in that edge location. So you control all these things using the cache policies.
Okay, so basically, I think from whatever you mentioned, right? Designing the cache key is critical, and it's one of the critical phases of designing the website, because you are supposed to kind of get it right. So Ankit, I'll come back to you on this, and I'll ask, from a security perspective, what are some things that we need to keep in mind? So Harsha, while you designed this whole thing, right? If you were to kind of monitor a transition from a web server to a CDN? Because in web server, it's pretty standard, right? You look for CPU, you look for memory, and you look for what are the latency, right? Like P99, P95, and so on. When you move to a CDN, what are some of the things that you look for, Harsha?
So the critical things when you want to go to when you want to deliver your content using a CDN when you want to put a CDN in front of your web server is you need to ensure that your cache policies or your request or origin request policies or your response address policies are very proper. You need to ensure that you define them very well. So like I said, just now I'll give you an example. Just now we gave an example that we can include that language type in the HTTP header in the cache key. So let's say there is an attack or attacker, or it may be a legitimate request also. Someone wants to modify this content language HTTP header. So the English US variant of the website, the HTTP header can be accessed in multiple ways. I can specify that HTTP header in multiple ways. And each time the value of this HTTP header is changing, I'll keep on storing the same copies of that English US variant of that of that HTML page in my edge location. So this in turn increases the load on my web server. So the main thing that we need to ensure is that properly define your cache policies and your request, your origin policies as well.
Cool. So if you were to look at it perfectly from just a DevOps perspective, right? Now forget the security aspect for a minute, Harsha. We'll come back to it and Ankit will answer those questions. So how would you kind of monitor the effectiveness of a CDN, or what are some of the metrics that you look for?
Okay. So there are multiple metrics exposed by, there are multiple CloudWatch metrics exposed by AWS for the CloudFront. So we make use of some of them, like let's say if our cache policy is not properly defined and there are a lot of cache misses happening. So CloudFront CloudWatch offers us some metrics saying these are the number of cache misses that happened in the past 5 minutes, or it exposes these kind of metrics in the CloudFront distribution. And also we do have WAF metrics. So we mostly are trying to protect our our CDNs using WAF ACLs or WAF rules that are present in the ACLs. So like CloudWatch also exposes some of the WAF metrics saying we have the number of requests that have reached the CloudFront distribution, or the number of requests that have been blocked by some of the WAF rules, or the number of requests that have been counted so that we can take a decision later. So all these metrics kind of help us in making decisions, or help us finding anomalies, and in turn help us detect if there is any security incident or attack.
Got it. So I think just to take away, right, some of the metrics that we need to look for is, one is we need to look for what percentage of requests get cached versus what percentage end up at the backend. And the second piece is whatever percentage ends up at the backend, then what is the reason for it, right? Because I think from whatever you explained, Harsha, designing the cache key is not like a one-time process. It's more of an evolution along with feedback. You kind of monitor these things and then you keep going. And also to look at the load on the server, right? Because the whole reason you put the CDN is because you had like this big beefy server, and with very few requests coming in, you've reduced the size of the server to improve the cost perspective, right? So those are some. Anything else that I might have missed, Harsha, from a metrics perspective?
No, I think we have covered almost all that.
Okay, good. And I think latency is also probably one thing which would have, that is the round trip time between the end client to the server. because you've introduced a CDN in the middle, I think that would have also kind of improved with the introduction of the CDN. Right. Okay, cool. We do have a couple of questions. So, Ankit, do you want to take this? CDNs need to decrypt for faster rendering based on edge location, but how to safely share your trusted certs and issues with GDPR compliance. So I think we'll get to the GDPR piece in a bit. I have a little bit of experience dealing with GDPR, so I'll answer that question. You want to take the other question, Ankit?
Yeah, sorry. What was the first part of the question, Ashok?
So the first part of the question was, how do you share your certificates with the CDNs? So we specifically use CloudFront, right? So Harsha, do you want to answer that question? Add to whatever Ankit says.
Okay, what that is a question, right? What if there are combinations of content that makes a web page? This will make a lot of variants of
No,
templates.
the previous one. The CDNs need to decrypt SSL for faster rendering based on edge location. So that is true. CDNs do have to decrypt SSL, so you have to provide them your certificates. So we use CloudFront, which is also like a managed service provided by AWS. So either ways, we are trusting AWS to do a lot more things. The certificate is like just one additional thing that we trust. Whereas if we were to use another third party, for example, let's say Cloudflare or Akamai, then we would have to trust our certificates with them as well. So yeah, I think you will have to kind of somehow trust them. So GDPR is it's a very interesting topic, right? So basically, if you are a user, and this is where let me explain like a straightforward scenario first, and I'll tell you when it becomes murky, right? So let's say you're a user who's residing in Europe, then you will obviously go to the Europe CDN, then your servers will be in the US, your servers will be in Europe, and also your databases and other data stores will be in Europe, right? So this is a straightforward situation where you say anytime a user comes in from Europe, then just go to the Europe, think of it as like the Europe bubble, right? So go into the Europe bubble. So let's say this particular user, let's call him Mark, right? So let's say Mark moves from Europe to US for a week. He goes to the US or India for a week for vacation. So then what would happen, right? Because their closest data center is the US, or the closest CDN is the US. So they go there, then they need to come back to the client device, and they have to be redirected to the Europe CDN and then the Europe bubble, right? So that's where it becomes murky, and that's where it becomes very challenging. Right, so the whole, if you're moving to Europe, and if you're going to have business in Europe, that's GDPR plays a very tricky part, especially when you're trying to design the CDN and the cache key. So what I've seen a lot of people do is while you're designing the cache key, you can also say based on origin, and you can say if your origin is based out of Europe, then go here directly. And also what I have seen a lot of other companies do during my consulting journey is they add a header. So let's say, I'm a Europe resident. So the minute they see this particular EU, then they redirect to the Europe bubble so that the requests and the data does not kind of go out of them. Okay, so Mani, do you want to take this question?
So just
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. To add to whatever Ashwat mentioned, in terms of trusting the CDN, that is where also a security consideration comes much before when we are onboarding a CDN service, which is why we say that whenever we are going for a CDN service, we need to ensure that we trust that vendor solution provider enough, so that when we are sharing our certs, it is amply clear that we are not risking ourselves in terms of onboarding the CDN itself, because there have been instances in the past, not with us, but in it is a known information in public domain also, not an SSL related issue, but there might be even simpler risks. Say, for example, CDNs also have some list of IP ranges through which it serves your content. So if the CDN provider itself is not trustworthy, so there is a chance that the range that is supplied through the CDN vendor is itself not having a good reputation. So your content will be blocked by different other vendors as well. So all of this can be taken care when you, at the very beginning stages, when you're evaluating for your CDN partners, you need to be evaluating with a security mindset, and perhaps ensure that whatever you are evaluating for, and whatever you end up with, you trust that particular vendor solution enough to share your credentials with them.
All right. Thank you, Ankit. And Mani, do you want to take this question? What if there is a combination of content that makes a web page? There's a lot of static and dynamic content, and for example, I think this person is talking about this will make a lot of variants for the page. I think they're referring to the language piece, where there are multiple variations of the language. Then what exactly would you do? Mani, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So basically, this will create a lot of variant. It depends on the use case, what you are, how many, if it is a language specific, I think some of the static content, it remains same. It's not going to change that. So those things you can redirect to CDN to S3 and then get it. But some things which has to go to the custom origin. Custom origin can be the application, ALB or EC2 or whatever instance. So say for example, you are talking about specifically for a user. So when I logged in, I need to see some content for me. When Ashwath logged in, and he need to see content for his profile or something like that. But here some of the things are static and some of the things are dynamic, right? So CDN, if you talk about in that perspective, so whatever you are going to render as a user, you have to combine both the things. So CDN will have the ability to take these, not only the static, it will be the origin can be S3, or it can be the application load balancer, or it can be the simple EC2 instance. So you can combine both of the things based on the use cases. But I think what Harsha mentioned, that use case, I think CDN can handle it, even though the variant with respect to the language, I think it's completely okay for it, because people come from different as a UK English and the US English. It's like we need to serve at the CDN level. So I think that use case, it makes sense to keep it as a static and generate a version of it and put it into the cache. But sometimes if you like user level things, if you want to share it, then I think you can take the two-way approach, like a combination of two things, static and dynamic, and CDN will support both the things.
Okay, cool. Got it. Thank you, Mani. There's another question. Maybe I can take this question because I have a little bit of an experience with working with a streaming service. So the question is, how do CDNs help with streaming data which are behind authentication? So the question is more of, okay, let's say Hotstar Premium, right? You want to watch a movie, it will say only people who have the gold subscription can watch it, or only people who have bought the premium subscription can watch it, right? So how exactly is that handled? So this particular scenario is handled. So let's say this is Hotstar and this is Akamai, right? So which is what they use. So Hotstar and Akamai will share a common secret. So this common secret will be used to decrypt a token. So Hotstar will set a token before it forwards to Akamai. So the token will get decrypted by Akamai, and it will check if the user is valid or not. So it will probably say, okay, username is Ashwath and the type of account is gold. So this whole packet will be sent encrypted with this common secret. It will be sent to Hotstar in a token along with the time of check or whatever. And Akamai will then decrypt this particular whole block. It will check for the time, it will check for the type of subscription, and if it is valid, only then will it show the whole packet or the video, right? So that's basically, what happens. And also they enable, so if you folks have observed, or if you folks have tried to use multiple people trying to watch Hotstar at the same time, more than 3 people, it will log you out, right? Like the fourth person will get logged out, or the first person will get logged out. So this is because they also do something I forget the exact name, but they keep checking every few seconds as to how many people are logged in with this particular account. So all of these things happen with the power of Akamai. So Hotstar backends can do the heavy lifting of this checking, while Akamai takes care of the heavy load of streaming. I hope that answers the question. And I'll also share a link in a little bit. So coming back to the security piece, right, Ankit, so how exactly, if somebody is moving to the CDN or on the journey of the CDN, what are some of the things that they need to kind of keep in mind, Ankit?
Sure, sir. So first of all, as we also mentioned in the very initial phases, we need to see if the use case supports the the movement from web server to CDN. So as we mentioned, it is we need to first of all identify what kind of content we are trying to deliver. Is it static or dynamic? And then what are the things, or how do we identify that whether this particular candidate is good candidate for caching or not? So as Mani was mentioning some time back, if there's something JavaScript based application, we can cache them fairly easily, and if there's static web pages, that can also be cached. At the same time, there are some security controls that we need to take care when we are moving from web servers to CDN. We need to, as Harsha was explaining, that everything works on the basis of cache keys. So we need to be vigilant about the designing of the cache keys. How do we design the cache keys in a way that we capture enough information so that our cache or the content that we have cached works, but at the same time we have to ensure that we do not cache anything which is authenticated per se. So we do not want any let's say PII data or any secrets to be also cached along with the content that we are caching. So these are some of the top of the mind, some of the pointers that we should think. At the same time, there's also a strategy called CDNs points of presence, which essentially means that how do you distribute the CDN network geographically. So if the origin server is sitting in US, so and your user that is also coming from Indian subcontinent. So how do you set up your presence in the local geography so that your content is delivered nearly at the same pace for a US based user and nearly at the same pace to the Indian based user. So this can be done when your strategy for pointing out or keeping your geographic distribution of CDN network is on point. And at the same time, this also gives you one added benefit of the off chance of, let's say, the origin server facing some difficulties, and a user in the Indian subcontinent wants to access a cached content. So since the points of presence of your CDN network is strategically placed, so even there is a downtime in the origin server, it would not in theory impact the content being served to the guy sitting in the subcontinent, because you've strategized it in a way that the content was already cached locally for him, and in a way he gets uninterrupted service of that particular web page.
So Ankit, one more question. So is there, from a security perspective, right, just putting on the hat of an attacker or like an offensive security person, is there any tooling or automated tool that you would run usually to kind of check for potential cache poisoning issues, right?
Yeah. So before that, I'll very briefly touch upon the concept of cache poisoning. So as Harsha mentioned, that we have some parameters that we pick from a request, and we form it what we collectively called as a cache key. And these cache keys are mostly typically contains the request line and the host headers. And these are the components of the request which are used for serving. But again, there are also components of the request which we do not include in the cache keys. So these are called the unkeyed components. So whenever there is an possible attack to any CDN network, what the attacker try to do is fit in their parameters on these unkeyed portion of the request, so that whenever the cached content is streamed, these unkeyed parameters also trigger at the same time. And if there is a vulnerability present in that page or that content that is being served through a cache server, so it can trigger a lot of different kind of vulnerability. So if the server was vulnerable to an XSS attack, and the attacker had somehow managed to ship in his piece of code, malicious code, in that unkeyed component, so it will also trigger that unkeyed part of the code when the content is delivered. So this is essentially what we call it cache poisoning. And again, tools like Burp Suite also comes inbuilt with a check which can give us idea about whether any server is susceptible to cache poisoning attacks or not. And again, when we first identify, so this basically steps to which we have to identify whether some server is susceptible to an attack. Again, most of them can be handled through automated tooling like Burp Suite. We first need to identify whether there is a possibility of cache poisoning or not. We do this by identifying the unkeyed parameters and then checking it largely through, again, an automated plugin of Burp itself to find out which part of that parameter can be poisoned. And once we have done the poisoning, we identify the vulnerability present in the server. And once we have the vulnerability as well as the point in which we can take use of that unkeyed parameter poison, then we can just very well go ahead and complete the attack. So everything is fairly automated through tools like Burp Suite itself. We just need to do it in the process way.
Awesome. Thank you, Ankit. So I think the takeaway is, if you use Burp Suite and there's a plugin called ParaMiner, then you can kind of figure out what combinations create problems, right? Okay, cool, awesome. I think there are two more questions that we need to answer. So one is, what is a better candidate to rate limit against DDoS, a CDN, or a reverse proxy gateway? So I can take that question. If you have static content, a CDN is way more preferable compared to like a reverse proxy gateway, because you don't have the server load won't go up. And again, usually the web application firewalls take some time to warm up before they actually kick in. The first 30 seconds, all the requests will go through. And if you have rate limit of 100, and if you have 10,000 IPs hitting you all at the same time through a DDoS attack, then you'll get 10,000 times 100 requests all at the same time, right? So it's always better to have a CDN to kind of do this. So I think we're up on time. So thank you very much, everyone. And if you do have questions, please tag Razorpay Engineering on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, and we'll be more than happy to answer questions. Thank you. Thank you again. It was great talking to you. Thank you, Ankit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.